Nice to see you too.
Okay, we are now open for business. So Ben, I was just letting Terry and Dejan know before that Meg's going to run kind of the logistics behind the scenes with questions, and we're going to have a question period kind of following all the presentations at the end. And so we'll try to save up all of our questions that we get throughout the presentations and then ask everybody at the end.
Great. Sounds good.
Perfect.
Stuart, not sure if you can mute your Google Chats notifications. It's coming through.
Yeah. That's a great question.
I'll look at you.
Looks like we've already got about 30 people in the room. Welcome everybody to the webinar. We're just going to give a couple minutes for folks to join, and then we will get started.
And Dejan does SQF and B.Sc certification.
Thank you for the plug there, Terry.
SQF is very good for the US market.
And B.Sc for the EU market.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, all right. Have a whole alphabet.
And he's in Guelph.
That's right.
Or they have an office in Guelph.
An office in Guelph, yeah. I am based out of that Guelph office though, but you know, I don't think anybody wants to be going to offices at this time.
No, but it does, the proximity helps.
Yeah, it's true.
We have a almost all Guelph panel here then, between you, Terry, and I.
Yes. Well, as people don't understand, it is the center of the universe.
That's right.
Yeah, well, you Guelph people would think that. The rest of us in the province obviously have a different perspective.
Stuart, where are you? Sorry.
I'm in Eastern Ontario.
Oh, well, Eastern Ontario is pretty. I'll give you that. And the 401's a lot more bearable on that stretch past Oshawa.
What's that, Terry?
Seceding with Quebec.
Yeah.
Well, for what it's worth, I'm moving back to Markham in the spring, which is technically, if Young is the dividing line, Markham is technically Eastern Ontario.
Very true.
Well, I guess that would be true. For those attendees that are just joining now, we're just giving a couple minutes. I think we'll aim to start in another 2 minutes at 1:05. But welcome to the webinar, and we'll just be getting started very soon. welcome everybody. We'll just get started in another minute here at 1:05. If you have any questions, you can direct them either to the Q&A box or to the comments in the bottom. Alrighty, it's 1:05, so I think to respect everybody's time and try to keep ourselves to somewhat of a timeline today, we'll get started. My name is Stuart Oak, and I'm the Director of Communications and Council. And welcome to the Preparing Your Organic Product for Certification and Market. All right. Let me just switch my perspective here. Just want to briefly go over our agenda for the day. I'm going to start off with a little bit of housekeeping and a welcome, which we've now begun, and then we're going to head into our presentation proper, which we have 3 panelists, which I will introduce right before their presentations, which will last for about an hour. We'll see how good we are at keeping ourselves on time, and then after that initial hour, we will head into a question period, which we're hoping to stimulate some conversation in the chat throughout the presentations, and we'll try to hold all of our questions right to the very end, and then have a really thorough question and answer period with our panelists, and try to make sure that everybody attending today gets the most out of being here. So as part of our presentation today, I'd like to acknowledge the land which I'm on today, because coming from a virtual workshop, I'll talk about the land which I'm on, which is the traditional and unceded territory of the Algonquin people. As a farmer myself, I continue to explore and consider what my role and responsibility is in stewarding our new farm and the land on which it resides, with the knowledge that that land was at some point stolen from somebody else. And so I think it's important to talk about, when we're making land acknowledgements, that they're really just the start of the process of reconciliation. And while the acknowledgement itself is obviously important, that without action, both personal, organizational, or institutional, we can't hope to address the wrongs which were perpetrated against Indigenous peoples across Ontario and in Canada as a whole, and work towards reconciliation between settler and Indigenous peoples. So to continue this essential work, we're going to invite everyone on the call right now to take a moment and reflect on the land on which they currently are on, and consider the questions: what are our obligations to the peoples who first inhabited this land and continue to do so today? How can we as individuals support existing local struggles? And how do we live and farm as good treaty people? So we'll just take a moment here. Thanks for that. I would invite attendees to visit the link which you can see on your screen, nativeland.ca, to find out more, if you're unfamiliar, about what land you are on and the history of that land, and the people who live there. So with that said, I just want to have a quick how-to. I know with the pandemic for the last year, some of us have spent quite a bit of time on Zoom, but for those of us that might not have spent quite so much time, just some quick instructions about the webinar format that we're on today with Zoom. We will be having a question period, as I mentioned earlier, following all of our presentations. If you have comments during the presentation, please send them out via the chat button at the bottom of your screen. We will also be recording the call so we can share the presentation at a future time. You can ask our hosts and presenters questions throughout the chat by using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and we will catalog those questions and answer them throughout the presentation, and then obviously have a more fulsome discussion at the end. You can also raise your hand using the raise hand icon, and if people want to model that now, feel free to raise your hands. And we'll know that during our question period, when you raise your hand, you want to ask your question out loud, and so we'll invite you to unmute yourself at that time and allow you to ask your question to our panelists out loud. And if you're having any please in a Q&A chat, and we will do our best to try and troubleshoot it. But also Zoom is definitely the right people for really technical questions that are beyond our capabilities. Wanted to take a brief moment to recognize DiCentra. Dejan is representing DiCentra in the webinar today, and they were grateful enough to help us get this webinar going and run some support for us. So we're grateful for their participation and their help today in getting this webinar going. And I also wanted to draw attendees' attention to the Eco Scholar Award. The Guelph Organic Conference is pleased to be partnering this year with Yorkshire Valley Farms to expand the Eco Scholar Award. This year, a total of $10,000 will be distributed to 4 deserving students. The Yorkshire Valley Farms Canadian Eco Scholar Award is open to all residents of Canada except Quebec who are 16 years of age or older and are full-time students actively enrolled in a Canadian academic institution. To apply, submit a video in which you share what role you hope to play in the organic regenerative movement. Application details, including the full rules, regulations, can be found on the Guelph Organic Conference website under the Eco Scholar tab, and submissions are due on March 19th of this year. So for those of you attending, please help spread the word to all the students that you know. It's a really great opportunity, and there's some real money involved for those people that win. And it's a great way to help support and guide the next generation of organic regenerative leaders. The Organic Council of Ontario is really excited to host this workshop today on preparing your organic products for certification and market as part of the 2021 Guelph Organic Conference. So we're grateful to the Guelph Organic Conference for extending the invitation to us to host the webinar. And just like to take a brief moment to tell you a little bit about the Organic Council of Ontario, or OCO. It's the voice for organics in Ontario. We're the only full value chain association operating at the provincial level. OCO represents over 1,300 certified organic operators in the province, as well as businesses, organizations, and individuals that bring food from farm to table. OCO works to catalyze sector growth, support research, improve training, increase data collection, encourage market development, protect the integrity of organic claims, and inform the public of the benefits and requirements of organic agriculture. Two of the big programs that OCO maintains is the Organic Directory and Data Portal. Reliable data and analysis on the organic sector is really critical for operators to make business decisions, but also for evidence-based policy making for our legislators and supporting the growth of the sector. So to that end, OCO has compiled and created what we call the Organic Data Portal, which draws raw data from multiple sources throughout Ontario and Canada and creates a hub for reliable organic information in the province. That information is accessible to anyone with further reports and analysis available to supporting members of OCO and also certified organic operators in the province. And the Organic Directory is a really useful tool which brings information from Ontario's certifying bodies to catalog the certified organic operators in Ontario and organizes them by type, description, and product into a searchable map for people. So the directory is used by consumers looking for organic products, producers looking for inputs, and retailers looking for organic sellers. It's an incredibly useful tool which helps to connect people and businesses to organic products. And you can find both those things on the Organic Council of Ontario website. So with all of that considerable housekeeping taken care of, I'd like to jump into our presentations for the morning, starting with Dejan Spasic. You'll have to correct my pronunciation when you shoot yourself up. Dejan is here today from DiCentra, where he's the Director of Food Safety and Quality Consulting. Dejan has spent much of his 10+ year career helping clients achieve and maintain regulatory compliance, as well as reach for the highest globally recognized standards in their respective industries. As a certified SQF, B.Rc, and GFCP lead auditor, he has traveled all over North America to work together with organic growers, processors, packers, and distributors to ensure that any ingestible product is always meeting the highest safety and quality standards to keep the general public safe. Welcome, Dejan.
Perfect. Thank you, Stuart. It's Dejan Spasic. Spasic is the pronunciation, but honestly, like I said earlier, it's not a big deal.
Okay, thank you.
I get worse. Yeah, no. So I can jump into whenever you're ready, Stuart, to transfer to my slides. Yeah.
Ready.
So again, talking about preparing your organic product for certification. What I will be kind of covering from my aspects here is the actual process of certification. You know, speaking from a consultant, but also speaking from the actual regulatory authority, who is in charge of these different aspects of it, what kind of controls are in place, what you need to know if you are going to be going through organic certification, or if you already have gone through, you're probably familiar with this, but a little bit of the background for all that kind of stuff. So first off, what I want to cover here is what do you need to know before you apply for certification. So the first thing, of course, is to know what the requirements are. And that falls under the Canadian organic regime. And so there's two specific items for that. That's the general principles of management. And this really covers, you know, what is and isn't permitted. How do you segregate non-organic, organic? What are the specific rules in regards to what you can do for your production? So it'll talk about everything from apiculture, aquaculture, to the general processes of a processing facility, how it is expected of you to control different items. And then the second thing being the permitted substances list. Now, this is kind of a big one because it has pretty much everything from what you can use in the process of crop production, livestock production, preparations, the cleaners and disinfectants you can use, even all the way to facility management, such as what you can use for pest control. So really, that's kind of a key factor there in determining what you can and can't work with when you're making adjustment from going from your non-organic production, whether it be growing all the way to processing, and making the right decisions for your business. So I did want to just quickly mention here on the permitted substances list, and won't take too much time on that. A lot of people always ask, you know, how is it easy to get an item added to that list? And there is a process for that. Things do get added and taken off that list from time to time based on new research, but they're always looked at for their necessity. You know, what's the purpose of them? Their origin, that they're made of the right things and they won't impact the organic status, and then their impact on the environment, growth, and production needs. So that's how things get added to that list. So that's all I'll cover for that. That's a whole big topic, and we can get into that for hours on end, but we'll stay away from that. The next part is people need to know that there is a little bit of a period of transition. If you're going from, as a crop grower, you're going from non-organic to organic, you have to be aware that your land needs to go through a 36-month transition period for your first organic crop. That's known as the 3-year waiting period. So if you're in the process deciding I want to go through this and you're transitioning your land from non-organic to organic, you have to be aware there is that period of time that you have to wait. As well as there is a 12-month period that you have to be applying the standard already in place, but the land has that 36-month period in place. And the last thing, developing your production plan. And this is probably the biggest undertaking for most of any of my clients, for sure. And this involves creating a plan that talks about how you're going to do record keeping, a plan that talks about how you are going to segregate certain items, how you're going to protect well, we're calling it identity preserve. We'll get to that in more detail later. But this is what you'll be submitting to your certification body prior to going through the certification. So I won't get into more of that. We can go to the next slide here, Stuart. Okay, so then this is basically the general process for what you'll be expecting when undergoing certification. So we'll get into all these detailed more in the presentation, but we're looking at which standard you have to meet and the certification agency that you choose to work with. Completing an application package. The application package, of course, being reviewed by your certification body. Someone being assigned as a technical auditor to be sent over to your site and do the full inspection, get all the documentation. And then finally through the certification process. And the next slide, which we can go to, we'll talk more to that. Yeah. So getting into like a little bit of the specifics here, also is to register your company with the certification body. You'll be filling out an application package. This application package will ask you everything from, how do you insure, who do you buy it from, provide certificates from your suppliers, whatever it might be. And so this part is really just documentation based. You explain everything about your business before the actual verification on site takes place. The next step is that the verification happens where the certification body says, yeah, we got everything. They ask me additional questions and of course payment because everyone likes to get paid. They'll assign an inspector to you, which we call a verification officer. And that person will be the one who will look at your documentation on site, come to your on site, see the practices, because of course it's not just the organic aspect of it, but there is a bit of a food safety aspect to everything as well. Any materials used in contact with your product has to be food safe, has to be made of the appropriate material, so there's no contamination potentials going on, everything to that aspect. So that'll cover the inspection. The review is a certification body. They'll complete the review of your file. They'll look at the inspector's report, any additional information required. These certification bodies are actually also then reviewed by something called conformity verification bodies, who just make sure that those certification bodies are doing their job right. And they will have the final say to the CFIA to get you on that COR list. They provide basically the final decision. Certification body says, yep, you're good to go. They look everything over, said, yeah, you know what, these guys fit all the requirements. And then they let the CFIA know that you're going to be added to that list. So that's basically the general process. And we can go to the next page there, Stuart. So the key things to know about about what you'll need to be aware of for the organic certification. So you'll need to be aware of your product composition. Obviously, how much of it's organic, what, there's different requirements, which we'll talk about on the next slide. Labeling and claims, so the use of the organic label, control, preserve organic integrity. How do you, if let's say you are working with something that is at a facility that has organic and non-organic, how do you provide controls? What do you have to consider? And the last and most difficult thing probably is the record keeping in the audit trail, which we'll get into more detail, of course, later too. So you can go to the next slide. So here we kind of just briefly talking about what we know in the US. Obviously, we're talking here more about Canada, but what there is equivalency agreement for organic between Canada and the US. In the US, you're allowed to say stuff like something is 100% organic. You're allowed to say some things like made with organic as long as it's more than 70% to less than 95% organic. In Canada, you can't do these kind of things. Everything's organic and you're able to use a label if it's above 95%. 100% organic claim is not permitted in Canada, which is a good thing if you ask me. And then made with organic is not acceptable, but you can declare the percent organic content if you're between 70 and 95%. And we'll go into the use of the labels here on the next slide. Perfect. Here we just quickly, the only way you could use one of these labels is if the product is 95% organic, and then basically you could use the USDA or Canadian organic if you are importing. The only way you could use as an importer the Canadian organic label is, again, if you have 95%. You could use the USDA one as well, but that's usually not what people go for. They'd rather use the Canadian one. And then I get this question all the time where people are like, I just sell within my province. I don't want to display the logo. How do I, how can I make an organic claim? Can I say organic? And the difficulty here is that we run into all the time is that not every province at every level has any sort of regulations in regards to use of saying organic at that provincial level if you're only selling within the province. For those kind of products, the only way to verify is that the CFI will only look into it if the organic claim is contested by somebody. Somebody makes a complaint and says, hey, I don't think this is organic, or through testing they establish that it's not organic, and that you might be misleading and you might not be making a truthful statement. That's really the only way that these things get checked on that level. Some provinces do have a system, like British Columbia, New Brunswick do have a regulatory system for the provincial level, but Ontario is one of those ones that does not. And I know that that OGO is probably one of the ones that OCO is one of the ones who's pushing for something like that. It's a very important thing to have. So that's something that is definitely on the horizon, hopefully. Going to the next slide there. So jumping into what the actual controls to preserve organic integrity on your site are. These are kind of the 5 basic ones. So storage and handling, what kind of processes are you doing? How do you segregate your product, your non-organic product, if you're using it from your organic product? Are you using the right packaging materials? Your use of water, what cleaning chemicals are you able to be used? And then finally, your pest management controls on the site. And we could jump to the next slide there, Stuart. Yep. And then obviously for the first one, storage and handling. So having physical measures in place at your site to separate organic and non-organic products is very, very important. Obviously, it's something that involves the level of fraud if you are not doing it right. Because let's say you are receiving, 100,000 bushels, 100,000 kilograms of product, and somehow you're selling 120,000. Well, something there isn't right. You're having a little bit of an issue with your segregation. And this is really for processing facilities. This is having separate lines. For crops, this is let's say you'll be rotating crops. You'll only using certain production units for the production of non-organic and certain ones for production for organic. So you definitely have to have controls for storage and handling. So the next one, Stuart. Oh, perfect. And so this is the question we get all the time. Can I grow both organic and non-organic on a farm? And this is a complicated answer because really it's only for a limited time and only with the right controls. The idea here that you should be, if you want to be growing organic products, you should be transitioning to full organic production for that site. There is different controls in place that you can have, like physical barriers, border rows, delayed planting, rotational periods like I mentioned earlier, isolation distancing, proper cleaning protocols, all sorts of stuff like that. But in the end, you are aiming for a full transition of your production. And there are obviously some cases that don't fit that timeline, where if you're using, for example, crops that look visually identical and things like that, you might have issues where even if you are transitioning, you will not be allowed to follow that process. And you might get something from an auditor saying something of that like. And the second one, obviously, it's already up here. So for your actual on-site practices at your facility, if you're a processor, you are very much allowed to do this. There's no such similar restrictions, but you have to have controls in place. So separate processing lines, sometimes separate production facilities, cleaning practices in between, all sorts of different things that could be seen as a control, but it is definitely something that is possible. And then here we're talking about packaging material. So this is something that gets overlooked a lot. Packaging material, like you're seeing here, it has to also meet the national program regulations. There's a whole section of packaging material that we can go into, but we'll kind of stay out of that. Basically, the idea is that the packaging material should not contribute to something that will cause an issue to your organic product from a safety or an integrity standpoint. So no synthetic fungicides, preservatives, fumigants, anything like that is permitted as part of packaging material. Water is a very key one here. So that's, again, the next section here. Water has to meet the drinking water requirements, Safe Water Drink Act of the Canadian Safe Water regulations. You have to be careful if you're using something for chemical treatment. This, of course, will have to meet exactly the same National Organic Program regulations in the US, obviously, the COR in Canada. You don't want to be using anything that could contaminate your product, again, that isn't on that list of permitted substances. Cleaning chemicals, there's a whole section on this on the list of permitted additives, list of permitted substances. So there are certain chemicals that you can use that are already identified on that list. In some instances, if there's the chemical that is not part of that list, you have to do residue verification. You have to prove that it's not going to be there once you finish cleaning. So this is all documentation that you have to have available, all stuff you have to think about before you decide, hey, what kind of cleaner chemical am I using? You have to think about all these things in addition. I would always recommend following the list of permitted substances, unless for some reason you can't, but that's basically something you have to consider as well. Pest management, so we briefly talked about this. There is something called facility management, a section under the list of permitted substances that says what you can and can't use. In most cases, pesticides of any sort, synthetic pesticides of any sort, are something that is looked down upon when it comes to organic. It's kind of, as it says there, it's a last resort. You don't want to use any synthetic materials. You want to try to address the pests in a manner that will not compromise your integrity for your organic certification and your organic products. And so, of course, following that list of permitted substances is always the #1 recommendation. And this is basically the biggest part of it. So, you could be doing everything right. You could be following all the steps, but unless you are able to prove it during an audit, and this is something that I come across all the time in my auditing experience, people are like, yeah, but I'm already doing this. Well, unless you can't prove it, then I can't really say that you're doing it, and I can't have you certified. So really, record keeping and an audit trail is extremely important. So you want it to fit your process. You want it to actually reflect everything that you are doing. You want it to have full disclosure. So, if I say I am doing this to organic product, I actually have records showing here's how I worked this batch. Here's how I did cutting here. Here's how I did any sort of step of the process that might be part of this is something that you'll want to have records on. And then this is an important one because it's different from most other standards out there. For example, the Safe Food Canadian says keep documentation for no less than 2 years. BRC has their own standard. SQF has its own standard. From an organics perspective, no less than 5 years is sufficient to demonstrate compliance. So you have to keep your records for at least 5 years. I'd always recommend even more just to play on the safe side, but at least the 5 years. And then finally, the kind of records that you're going to be working with, because you have to be able to prove traceability through the whole process for identity preserved, you'll want to have your batch records, your shipping and receiving documents, and any other document that can support that idea of a mass balance. So what a mass balance is essentially is how do you prove that you received this amount and that this amount came from it? And if your mass balance is not correct, if it doesn't all make sense, you could be in a little bit of trouble. So that mass balance is one of the easiest ways that you can use to prove that your supply chain is working. I received this, I sent out this, the numbers all make sense, and it's one of the key requirements for being organic certified. And the last thing here just goes into a little bit more detail about that. So receiving records will look at everything from, obviously, you'll want to have things on file such as certificates of analysis, product specifications, certificates from the site that is already organic certified that they provide for you, non-organic ingredient documentation. So if you're going to be using something that's not on the permitted list, or something that's is on the permitted list but is not part of your process, from an organic standpoint, when we're talking about that 95%, 70% stuff like that, you have to have documentation for that as well. And then of things that some people forget is also because trucks and transportation are a big part of your program as well. So checking those trucks to make sure they are clean, they don't have any contaminants on them, they do not present a risk to your organic product by shipping it with non-organic product that's open. Anything like that is a consideration too. And so then obviously from storage and production records, we already talked about that. Shipping records, we talked about that. And since the slide already went there, that's fine. In general, keeping that audit trail, keeping your record keeping in place is very key. And that's really what your whole certification will rely on. The practices on site and your document keeping. So that's it for me. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, obviously we'll address at the end, as Stuart mentioned. Thank you, Stuart.
Thanks a lot, Dejan. Much appreciated. So next up we have Ben Cullen. Ben, I didn't have a chance to check with you beforehand, but I scrubbed this out of your website, so hopefully it's all right here. But Ben is the founder and owner of Cullen's Foods. Cullen's Foods was born out of a love of food, growing, and community, dealing with Canadian farmers they know to transparently provide the best quality products in a manner that improves physical health, the environment, and our communities locally and abroad. Their mission is to provide a thoughtful alternative for people who care about what they eat, where it comes from, who produces it, how it affects their health and the environment, and who want to be part of a better system through the choices they make. And I will just stop my share so I can turn it over to Ben here. And Ben, you're gonna share your screen.
I am. Thank you, Stuart. And I'm thinking I should maybe update the copy on my website. That's good. That's
Fair
good.
enough.
Thanks, everyone. Sorry, I'm a little off guard here. I thought I was last, but I'm happy to go second. Anything else to add, Stuart?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, I'll take it away. So I think I'm here to provide somewhat of an entrepreneur's perspective on starting from scratch, starting from zero, and getting a product out to market. So I'm going to just tell the story of Cullen's Foods, which really only originates 3 years ago. But we have been successful in getting an organic product to market. So here we are. So we were founded in 2018. And basically, the founding insight was, I personally noticed a lot of the organic beans that I was seeing in the market were coming from China. Personally, I felt that local was an equally important quality to the things that I was buying. And so that was sort of where we decided to act. So I contracted with some Ontario organic growers, and we started selling dried beans in 2019. And then in January 2020, we launched our line of canned navy beans, black beans, kidney beans. And just this month, we launched chickpeas. So currently, we're distributed at Loblaws and Sobeys and about 400 independents nationwide. So we've made some good progress thus far for a young brand in sort of grocery, frankly. So this is what we look like. That's the latest lineup. And I'm just going to give a little more of a personal background because it really does all lead up to this. And I always wanted to have my own business. I grew up in a retail family and I love grocery. I worked at a grocery store in high school, but it was in grade 10, pretty rudderless teen. My sister was studying landscape architecture at Guelph, and she bought me tickets to the Guelph Organic Conference. And that was sort of what set the course, because I grew up in the suburbs of Toronto. I'm not from a farm family. I'm from a horticulture family, independent garden centers and nursery, but not farming per se. So it does all lead up to this. You'll kind of see. It seemed random at the time, this path, but it did lead up to this. So I went to the University of Guelph, Ridgetown campus to get my diploma in agriculture. Ridgetown, you could call it a storied institution. And by that, I mean there's lots of stories from Ridgetown about things like setting couches on fire and letting piglets go at Tim Hortons. But it's also a really good place to learn about agriculture. So I worked in kind of conventional ag, went out east, studied business, worked in independent retail there, the Frito-Lay wrap, and I ended up at Smucker's when I graduated with my business degree. So Smucker's, obviously the American traditional consumer packaged goods company. Now, I might add, Smucker's has a very large natural foods business. I was not on that, but it was a great place to learn how consumer packaged goods work, because selling into grocery is not like selling into any other old retail channel. So when I left Smucker's, I joined my dad. Together, we have a column in the Toronto Star. We do some media stuff, sell some gardening tools. And then, of course, 3 years ago, I started to work on this Cullen's Foods thing. So here's what I think anybody who wants to do what I've done ought to know. And these are the do not pass go hurdles that you ought to clear. First and foremost, I didn't do this early enough. Incorporate a separate business for your organic food product. Corporations are the best and worst thing about capitalism. You need one. Secondly, register with GS1. So if we're looking at a product, and a lot of people don't know this, maybe it's obvious, I'm not sure who I'm talking to on this presentation, that barcode, you can't have it unless you're registered with GS1. So put aside 2 weeks to sit on the telephone on hold, and eventually you'll get the GTIN numbers that you need to register your products, because you're not going to retail without them. And then get your branding. You can do it through friends. You can pay an agency. That's up to you. But start your branding early. because as soon as you start making those impressions, that's your calling card, and engage a certifying body. So I find any issues I've had with certification can always be solved with a little bit of time. So start as early as possible. Okay, tips for getting certified. Start early, don't do fraud, and if you can afford it, pay for help. I'm a bootstrapper, so I've learned a lot of things the hard way, but there are companies out there that can help you with this, like, you know, DiCentra. And it is, if you're like me and you're an entrepreneur, you might have a default position to authority that can be hostile. Put that aside. Your certifier is not a cop to get in your way. It's a teacher who can help you, but you have to go through the steps if you want to get the passing mark. And they're really important. They play a really important role in the industry. So treat that process with respect. But if you're not doing fraud, and I think everybody probably on this call has innate understanding of what the organic standard is, you can study it, but it's all fairly intuitive, common sense. The record keeping is important, but at the end of the day, as long as you're doing things right, don't feel discouraged by what can seem overwhelming at times. So these are the steps, and for getting your organic product to market. And it starts with not passing go, checking those boxes, getting your incorporation, figuring out what your brand is going to be, sort of the idea. And then you want your MVP, and in startup terms, that's your minimum viable product. So I'm going to take you through this, but these are essentially the steps. MVP, rejection, reiteration. So you're going to go out there, you're going to fail hard, you're going to go back, and you're going to take all that feedback you got. And then before you can go to distributors, you're going to be selling this stuff out of the trunk of your car. You got to get your proof of concept. And once you have about 20 or so stores, retailers who are with you, and you're getting reorders, then you can approach distributors. And so that's sort of the stage we're at now. I've got 2 distributors, and that's what's got us national. And then it's up to you whether or not you want to start exporting. You can decide to be successful or happy at any step, but certainly there are days where it feels elusive just beyond the next step. So hang in there. This was my MVP. We started with dried beans. And the whole point of an MVP is to not get overly invested, just to get the minimum product out there so you can show it to people and they can tell you if they hate it. And if they hate it, you want to know why. And it's going to hurt. It's really hard work. It's the hardest part of the process. But there was a great quote from the founder of LinkedIn, Reid Hoffman. He said, if you're not embarrassed by your first product, you waited too long to launch. And he's absolutely right. So we went out there with some dried beans. Our quality wasn't perfect. They were in these compostable bags, which cost me the earth and nobody was willing to pay for. And I stood there at the Guelph Organic Conference. I might have talked to some of you. And I got the hard and honest feedback, which was, that's too much money for dried beans. I tend to buy canned anyway. And I mean, you're going to have to work. Quality is always an ongoing project. And we've made huge strides with quality as we've gone. So anyway, this is my minimum viable product. Go out there. There's me and my wife at the organic conference, getting rejected, taking that feedback. But you also have to find the good bits, right? And the good bit for us was people wanted this. People wanted Canadian grown. They wanted organic. And what we were doing, because we were buying directly from the farmer, was we were telling them who the farmer was. Because I come from traditional grocery. I'll talk about sort of what I call the black box program. So black box problem, that is. And then you feedback. So after you've been out there, gotten some rejection, you want to get in. This is where a thriving independent retail trade is so important for fostering innovation and small business in Canada, because these were the guys. It was Stone Store in Guelph, it was Raise the Root in Toronto, and it was Mama Earth Organics. They gave me my first 3 orders, and they have from day one been indispensable to Cullen's Foods, because we share a mission, and that's the really important thing. And they can see what I'm trying to accomplish. I'm trying to accomplish what they're trying to accomplish, and together we can work together. These are true partnerships. And this comes before the distributor. And I can't say enough about how valuable these types of retail outlets are in fostering innovation and new companies in organics. And anyway, that's that for that. Still work with them. So take your minimum viable product, go back, ruminate on it, reiterate, bloom, grow, spread your wings. We knew we had to go to cans. So in year 1, we had 15 acres. In year 2, we had 45 acres. basically had to take a leap of faith because at every turn people were telling me, Ben, you got to go to cans. I called every cannery in the province and they said, oh, you got 15 acres? That's nice. Have fun with that. Do it in your kitchen. So the next year we did 45 acres because that was the minimum I could get with the cannery. And last year we did 450 acres, another 10x growth because we found our wings. This is what people want. So once you kind of have the first 20 stores in the wings and you're constantly listening for that feedback, then you can bring on distributors. And so we're working with Neil Brothers in the East and Left Coast Naturals in the West. Great distributors. There's lots of great distributors out there. When you start talking to them, you're looking for a distributor that's what we call pioneering a brand. So they're willing to take a brand that isn't already out there and be the first mover with it. On their part, it requires a bit of investment, but the benefit to them is they're the first mover with it. And if you're a successful brand, you know, they get ownership of that for the first few years of marketing. So that is basically the journey. And I don't know if I told you anything that you don't already know, but there are hurdles. And if you haven't seen any of those ones I just pointed out to you, that you could fall on them. So I hope that you would heed those from my experience. But I've also learned some other things along the way. And so this is some of the random pontificating, some ideas and opportunities that I see for other entrepreneurs, farmers, marketers, whoever's who see the opportunity to get Ontario organic to market. Because remember, I'm here speaking for Cullen. I'm here speaking for our Organic Council of Ontario. I'm here speaking for Ontario Organics. And really, it all comes back to the consumer. So here are some of the ideas and opportunities that I've seen just sort of in my experience working in consumer packaged goods and in marketing. So certainly this is true. Consumer trust is at an all-time low, and it's affecting the major brands, the national brands. It also affects the control label retail brands. So the key here is, how do you unlock that trust? And I mean, this is just an opinion, so take it for what you will, but we have really hung our hats on transparency so that every can that we sell is lot coded and we can tell you exactly who grew it. We have farmer bios on the website. And I think as far as messaging goes, it's not, I think we need to forget the age of branding. Scott Galloway is a great marketing professor from New York University, and he just wrote a recent book about this. He says, you know, we are past the brand era and we are in the product era. So you can't take a subpar product and force a message or a notion or a romantic idea about what it is. The product has to have its own merits. It's about authenticity. And most of the consumers who find you are pretty well educated. I think my advice to other food marketers, my advice to marketing boards is stop treating the consumer with such contempt. They've never been more educated. All you have to do is open your book and say, hey, this is what we are. This is what you're doing. We respect your intelligence. You could choose this or not. And I think if you're doing things the right way, you'll find that people really appreciate that. And the other thing is, so I call this the black box problem. And you're going to find, if you're starting from a primary agriculture point of view and you want to get to market with your product, the food industry in Canada is bewildering. It's complex. It creates a black box. And that black box benefits entrenched players. It does not benefit consumers, and it does not benefit startups. If you can navigate that box and tell the story about what happens between the farm and the consumer, that's your story. That's your product. That's the thing that people are looking for. That isn't just brand messaging. It's an authentic, trustworthy product that the market, frankly, so desperately needs. So anyway, this is how we do it. We use lot codes. You go to the website. Chad, so I say people seem to like farmers. Chad's one of my best friends from Ridgetown. I say, I don't get it. I think the more time people have spent with you, the less they'd like you. But people want to know, and that's granted. I want to know too. And so certainly if you're buying from farmers, put them front and center, give them a voice in the product story. It's so important just how things are made and where. People care. So I say the power couple, local and organic. This is Google Trends. And so I just pulled this up. This is 2004 to present. And it's not a perfect analysis because I think people tend to research organics more online. There's more, it has just greater body of material out there. But you'll see where the local and the organic trend line have intersected in the last year. And I personally believe that for consumers, these two qualities are no longer mutually exclusive. And there is a huge opportunity for Ontario-based producers to get products to market that are both organic and local. And those two attributes are of equal importance. And I just think that that's so important, because not only does it benefit the consumer because it's what they want, but it benefits the industry, because remember, OCO is a value chain organization, but the Ontario organic sector benefits from strength right down the value chain. And so I say the $1 billion opportunity under our noses. I was emailing back and forth with some OCO board members this morning. There's debate about this, but you can see where Ontario, we're importing so much more than we're exporting. So you see the net trade position for Ontario Organics. That is the opportunity. And lastly, my advice, if you're going to do this as a solo entrepreneur, is to get a business partner. I keep Ruby is with me at all times. There she is. And for the benefit of your sanity, before you pick up the phone and make a snarky call on a banker or a packaging supplier or some other person who's maybe disappointed you along the way, just take a minute, take your dog for a walk, chill. And lastly, once you spend some time with your dog thinking about this, relaxing, gathering your thoughts, you're ready to move on, remind yourself why we're doing organic. And I worry because organic is a brand. We all share brand organic. And there is a tragedy of the commons if we don't steward it properly. And I see sometimes cynicism in the products that get marketed, where there's this opportunism maybe to get the cheapest organic product out there at the highest price. And that's not why we do organics. I don't know about what motivates you. I'm largely motivated by basically a constant state of environmental anxiety, be it climate change or biodiversity. And I think, organic's not perfect. I love the infighting. We're constantly debating why we do this, but the fact is it's the best thing we have, and we have to treat it with respect. So see above, don't do fraud, do this in good faith. And if you're keeping your receipts and if you're a good record keeper, everything else will follow. And you can feel good about what you're selling, and the people will find you. And that's my very non-technical take on getting your organic products to market. Please stay in touch. I'm under time. You're welcome, Stuart. I was a university debater, so I tried to get that out there as fast as possible. But please stay in touch. You can find me at these places. Join OCO. And if you see me at the Guelph Organic Conference next year, that's what I look like after a day of rejection. I might be looking even a little lighter on my feet if people are buying lots of beans. So thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Thanks a lot, Ben. That was great. You're a little under time, but I think you did a great job. So we'll just slide right into our final presenter for the workshop, which is Terry Ackerman, who is the Director of Business Development for RIS Global. Terry's a graduate of the University of Victoria, has held domestic and international senior management and marketing positions at companies such as Levi Strauss, Converse, and Organic Meadow. Terry has been responsible for the development, marketing, and profitable distribution of over 160 consumer packaged foods, products in the organic, kosher, and halal food sectors. These products are distributed in Canada, the US, the Middle East, and the Far East. At Organic Meadow, he introduced such products as the world's first Tetra Pak organic milk products and Canada's first lactose-free organic milk. Terry has significant experience in food product development and packaging, food production and distribution, and working with food retailers and distributors in North America and beyond. Terry has worked with consumer packaged goods and distributors in over 22 countries. Welcome, Terry. I'll just queue up your slideshow here. I'll just ask you to unmute yourself there. And Ben, do you want to stop sharing your screen?
Oh, yes. Oh.
Perfect. No, I'll do it for you there. I am ready whenever you are, Terry.
Good. RIS Global, let me put a little ad for RIS Global while we're getting started. We are one of the largest halal food companies in Canada. We export primarily Canadian halal products to the Mideast. We're going into the US, and Europe, and across Canada. What we are looking for, and one of the reasons I'm here, is we're looking for organic halal food products. There's a dearth of them on the market, and the market is huge. To put it in perspective for you, the halal food market in the GTA is 1 billion plus and growing at 10% a year. So where do you find another $100 million worth of halal food products every single year? So that's one of the reasons I'm here, is to assist companies in getting market ready. Next slide, please. If you take a look at, go back up to the previous slide, perfect. If you take a look where the product concept is, and you move through the whole criteria into organization, it starts with the product, it ends with the product, and as been alluded to, unless you have the quality in the product, don't bother doing anything. Once you determine that, who's your target customer? What sector do you want to be in? What business do you want to be in? And many companies don't know. When I ask them what business they're in, they're not quite sure. So for example, if you ask McDonald's what business they're in, they will say they're in the entertainment business, which is a far cry from what we would normally think of as, well, they're in fast food. What is your positioning in the market? Who are you up against? What does your packaging look like? I'm primarily talking today about the consumer packaged goods industry because this is what we do. But your packaging is everything. If you have bad packaging and great products, it's not going to sell off the shelf. What is your price point strategy? Do you have a strategy? Have you thought about having a price point strategy? If you're overpriced on the shelf, you're going to fail. If you're underpriced, you're leaving margin on the table. And as Ben alluded to, once you reach a certain point, you're going to have distribution. Most organic companies do not succeed because they do not have the appropriate distribution. How do you get to the truck to the door? And we'll discuss parts of that. And the last 2 points, promotion and organization, we're not going to discuss. So we're only going to be focusing on a few things today because time is short. Next slide today. Keep going. What you have to do when you're developing a product is figuring out what are the key consumer trends. There's one on traceability. There's one on indulgence. There's one on health and convenience. There's one on snacking. By the way, Canadians have been very successful in raising the first dashboard generation. Over 70% of meals are consumed on the dashboard of a car. That's changed recently, and more home cooking kicking in, but I suspect that we'll go back to dashboard fairly soon. So you have to find out for your product, looking at the key consumer trends, where does your product fit into this continuum? You're looking for the ideal sweet spot where you can go all the way from indulgence-free to better for me and my world. Somewhere in there, your product fits, and you must understand that at the outset. Next slide, please. You also have to understand, where's the consumer at for your product? Are they a natural and organic consumer? Are they looking for local? Are they looking for healthy and nutritious? By the way, I was at an organic conference where they had candy floss sold, organic candy floss. So where does that fit into that health continuum? Are they looking for taste and freshness? Are they looking for social responsibility? So you have to determine where that consumer is for your product. Who are they? What do they look like? And oftentimes I will hear in talking to different companies, my neighbors like it. Means nothing unless your neighbors can virtually buy everything you make. You need to test your products. You need to find out where they are on this continuum. They are there somewhere, and every product fits somewhere. Next slide, please. The successful products have very specific points that you can check off. They are targeted at distinct market segments. They don't try to be all things to all people. You will fail if you do that. What is your key point of differentiation? If you have a Me Too product, and I cannot tell you how many, with full respect, jams I've seen in the marketplace where we'll talk to companies about their business plan and they say I have the best strawberry jam. Well, Ben came from Smucker's, very powerful company, and they will not allow you onto the shelf. What is the emotional connection between your product and the customer? And all products have an emotional connection. Are they positioned to meet perceived needs of the customer? What do you think your product's going to do for that consumer? And here's the important one. Do you have a brand and value promise? And do you do it every single time? We've all had products we've been disappointed in. I'm a big believer in canned beans, love canned beans. But my favorite brand once I had a problem with, and they did not deliver on the value promise. I didn't buy that brand for a year. So the consistency of the brand promise, and this is what Dejan's organization does with the B.Sc and the different certifications, means you can deliver that promise. Here's the tough one. Market competitiveness. What is your product? What is your pricing? And what does your packaging look like? If you don't look good on the shelf, you're going to die. 20% of most consumers only see 20% of the products in the store at any one visit. So do the math. It may take a consumer 5 times going into a store before they actually see your product. Then you've got approximately 2 seconds to grab their attention. So you have to meet the criteria for packaging. And then when they look at it, does it meet their needs? And what is the price? By the way, 90% of new products fail at retail. So if you want to beat those odds, you're going to have to be first to market. If you are Me Too, you will die. You have to have consistent and positive sensory. It has to taste the same all the time. If you buy a product and they've changed the formulation to take the formulation down, put a little more salt in, consumers respond by saying there's something wrong with my product. It's not the same, and they stop buying it. Most organic products fail because of distribution. They can't get it into the stores, or you're not in enough stores. Getting a distributor's attention is hard. You have to audition your product. You have to have prior sales. Many distributors will say, we'll take your product on if you have $100,000 a year in sales. It will take over all of them. And by the way, we will make more money than you do on this product. And you have to have a good marketing plan. The distributors aren't going to do it for you, but you have to have things like how are we going to do in-store testing, we're going to do advertising, etc. These are what the successful products do. And it can be from your local GM right up to the best organic products in the market. Next slide, please. I suggest all of you who are looking at moving products into the market to give this little test to yourself. Where'd the idea come from? Who are your target customers? And write them down. Don't do it in your head, write them down. What are your key points of differentiation? I have sat in more than one meeting in front of stores such as Loblaws and Sobeys, and the buyer look at you and say, what makes you so special and why are you wasting my time? You better have those product points of differentiation. What are you going to be in retail or food service or both? Most products can go into one or the other or both. What's your product profile? Meaning, how many SKUs do you have? An SKU, for those who don't know, is a stock keeping unit. So you saw the picture of Ben's products, he's got 4 SKUs. What's your category fit at retail or food service? The retailer is going to say, where do you fit in my store? Which shelf are you going to be on? You have to know these, have answers to these questions. And here's the big one. What is your pricing and margin structure versus the competition? We give seminars where we teach people to do retail math, where you can figure out your competition's price, sell-in price by walking down the aisle. Relatively simple to do. Your pricing is key. Overpriced, you're off the shelf. Underpriced, you're leaving margin on the table. Next slide, please. This is just to give you an idea when people say, well, pricing is easy. I just take my cost and add a bit of money to it, and that's how it's going to work at retail. Wrong. If you do that, you'll probably either leave money on the table or go broke. So what happens is you have primary pricing strategy for your product, market penetration, meaning you want to grab as much space as possible. What you may want to do is go with a cost plus basis on your pricing. Price skimming. What you want to do is markets wide open, make as much money as possible. That's a strategy. Market stability. You don't want to get the big boys like the Schmuckers of the world upset at you. So you go to market with price that's going to keep them happy so you don't engender a price war. Margin capture. You're the first kid on the block and try to make as much money as you can before you have to go back to get into a price war. Or differentiation. Products are out there at $10.99 and you're out there at $7.99. Wow. Or usually the reverse is they're out there at $9.99 and you're $12.99. What makes you so special? You have to answer these questions and understand your pricing strategy. What is your secondary strategy? Next slide, please. These are just two things that standard or uniform price. All costs and all products are not equal. Are you going to have a standard price for all the products? Where are you going to ship from? Most companies can lose their butts on freight. Freight companies love small companies because they can erode most of your margin just paying for the freight. Zone pricing. Retailers price their products differently by postal code and by part of country. So if you look at the stats, if you're in an upper end income area, you may be paying less money, actually, ironically, because you're more mobile than consumers in an area where they're not as mobile. What is the zone pricing? How does that work? Do you bundle all your pricing together? Distributors will do this. They'll bundle your price with other products. Line pricing, all your products priced the same. So it looks the same at retail. Everything's $9.99 for your complete line. And survival pricing, meaning that's the last price you need, the lowest price you need to survive to get the cash flow. Pricing is key, and you should spend an enormous amount of time getting your costs down. The key to this in the packaged goods business is knowing what level of packaging you're going to have. You have primary packaging. The bottle you see there, the plastic bottle is very standard. Secondary packaging, how many packages are in a box? The tertiary packaging, most people in the organic industry don't have to worry about, and we're not shipping by truck, but the first two are key. Next package, please, or next slide. These are two of the brands that we developed. If you look closely at them, the packaging was designed by a multinational packaging company out of Toronto. Designed to be seen at retail from approximately 10 meters away, and it works. Designed to go into a frozen cupboard. The name is cheeky. We put the umlauts on it to invoke the flavor of Europe. We put the background on it so it stands out very distinctive. This packaging costs approximately $60,000. Packaging, you get what you pay for. If you're in the packaged goods business, this is your entree onto the shelf. We take this packaging worldwide, and it was designed for multi-languages, and we can translate it into Arabic. We can go an enormous number of places with packaging like this. You don't have to spend that kind of money, but your packaging, if you're in the packaged goods business, is your face to the world. And get people to review it. Don't be afraid to take it to retailers, and don't be afraid to have people saying, Canadians are very polite. If you go to a trade show, they'll say, oh, that's nice. I want the guy who says that's crap and that's garbage and never seen anything so bad in my life, and here's why. Find friendly buyers who will do that for you. Next slide, please. Here's the tough one. What are your distribution options? As you can see, You're the vendor. Do you use a broker? Do you use a distributor to get to the retailer? Do you go through the retailer's distribution center, and that may cost you up to 8% margin to do that? Nothing's free. Do you do DSD, direct store delivery? I've seen many organic small companies saying, I deliver it myself. Really? What's your cost of delivery? You're a mighty expensive truck driver. And when you look at your cost of delivery, they can't figure out why they're not making any money. How do you get to the retail network? There's direct contracts, there's party, there's product distributors. But these are essentially it's designed, actually this slide, if you think of it, it's like a jellyfish floating over the sea. You're the one on top, you're the vendor. And I may bring in one important thing that we're going to talk about when we talk about distribution is the vendor pays, and then the vendor pays, and then the vendor pays. You are the source of money for everybody. Next slide, please. These are the pros and cons of going direct to retail yourself. There are a lot of pros to do it, but it's an extremely expensive proposition. You're limited by the amount of time you could spend getting to the stores. You're limited by the number of stores you can get to. And by the way, many stores, it'll be cute for a while to deliver out of the trunk of your car, but after a while, the stores are going to say, hey, hold it, I want a covered truck, or you can't bring the stuff into my store. I will tell you right now that no major will allow you to deliver out of the truck of their store. It's not going to happen. But the pros are you get to know your retailers better. The cons are difficult to get appointments. Who are you and why should we care? The opportunity cost to your time, most people don't consider. While you're doing this, you're not doing other things. So it's very, very expensive to do. By the way, also, you have to set up your own customer service, your sales, your retail. Most organic businesses, startups, or entrepreneurs. They're like Ben. Ben is the sales, marketing, accounts payable, accounts receivable, and production department, et cetera, all rolled into one. And his dog there is head of security, so no one can break into his place. So let's go. What does the distributor do? Distributors, if you go back to next slide, please. For most companies, unless you have your own fleet of trucks, you will go through a distributor. When you're doing your pricing model, you have to assume the distributor is going to take 15 to 25 to 30% to run his business. So when you're doing your pricing and you're calculating your margins after that, talking to distributor, they will always ask that one question: do you have distributor pricing? If you have not built it into your margins, the possibility of you losing a lot of money is right there. Distributors can be very good. By the way, a lot of distributors have between 5 to 50,000 products. So you may be the flavor of the minute, and that's about it. Distributors move cases. That's their job. So the pros are they can get an audience for you, depending on the size of the distributor. By the way, distributors are hired to be fired. They know it. They know once volume builds, you may move to a larger distributor. They also know that if your volume builds big enough, they'll pull the line and you'll do it yourself. So their objective is always looking for new products. Also, because they're established with retailers, they can get the new line into a retailer because of their established relationships. By the way, distributors aren't going to take on a line they don't think they can sell because it'll ruin the relationships with the retailer. The con is you may get lost in the assortment. If you're dealing with a distributor with 10,000 items, you've got 4. Good luck. You have to get out and promote the product yourself. And by the way, your line will be dropped unless it performs very quickly. They do not want to carry that inventory. They don't want that cost. There's 2 types of distributor. One is a stocking distributor who will stock your products and buy in advance. The other is order for order distributor who will only order from you when they've got an order. So you have to decide what distributor you want and how you're going to work with them. By the way, been my experience that for distribution at retail, the distributor's never out of stock, the vendor never delivered it to me. So just keep that in mind, that unless they're a stocking distributor, you may bear the brunt of their inability to fill orders. And by the way, you have to interview for distributors. Just because you show up, they may be looking at 20 or 30 or 40 products each season. So those are the pros and cons in using a distributor. At the bottom line, at the end of the day, is that to get retail ready is more than just saying, starting with, I've got a product. So talk about the product idea, go back, do your homework. And if there's one thing I can't emphasize enough is make sure that you know the costs down to the penny. If you're dealing with somebody like Saputo Dairy, why do they make so much money? They know their costs to the 15th decimal point. They can tell you exactly what it costs. And I've talked to more than one business who does small business getting started, who does not know their product cost. They say it should cost this, but when you drill down, they don't know. They don't know the cost of distribution. They don't know to the final penny what the cost of packaging is. So if you're going to be successful at retailer, if you're going to be one of those 10% who make it and do very, very, very well, the only thing I can suggest to you is do your homework and do it well. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Terry. That was really excellent. I'm excited to move into the question period here. So I would invite people who haven't already to throw some questions into the Q&A box, and we will ask them as they come in. But maybe to get us rolling and give some people some time to percolate on some questions they might want to ask the three of you. I thought I would start off by a question about scale. The three of you have mentioned scale and getting the right combination of supply chain pieces in place in order to effectively market your product. But I imagine there's folks listening to this call that are at all different scales, and perhaps some of them are focused mostly on local markets and a very local type supply chain. So what perspective do you have on scale and what it takes to be successful? And are there different scales where you can find success, even if the tools at those scales are maybe a little bit different?
I have some ideas. Terry or Dejan, do you want to start? Or
No, go ahead, Ben.
my advice is to keep your fixed costs as low as possible for as long as possible. And I think it's easy to get out ahead of your skis and say, this is what I'm going to make and this is how much I'm going to make of it, and go ahead and invest in all your own production infrastructure. You're either going to outgrow it or it's going to be the wrong infrastructure for the wrong product. And it becomes a sunk cost. So I have found constantly researching and cold calling and connecting with the co-packers in the province and maintaining relationships with custom jobbers, like people who can do the cleaning or the canning or whatever on a custom basis, has been the key to scaling sustainably, because the equipment's out there and a lot of it's underutilized. So a lot of people are willing to run it.
I think one of the biggest things I run into in the packaged goods business is people have a false sense of economy, meaning that when they're getting started, they feel that I'm going to have, and I've seen this, I'm going to have labels or packaging made for my product. And if I get 10,000 of them made, I save 1 cent each. Even though their product plan says, well, I'm not going to use that for 2 years. Versus spending that extra penny and just buying as needed. And Ben's absolutely right. Keep your overhead, your fixed, and also your variable costs under total control. I would rather short the market then have to carry an enormous amount of inventory, and not only in finished goods product, which I can turn around fairly quickly, versus having a lot tied up in finished goods, or equally important, just in ingredients. A lot of small companies don't do that. They buy your supply of glass or whatever they have to do. But keep those two important components under control. That way you'll be able to scale.
Until you start to deal with majors, like the larger retailers, you cannot afford to short.
No, you cannot.
And when you make that jump, you have to be ready to invest in basically overcapacity.
Great, thanks. I think Meg from OCO has the next question for the panel.
Hi, everybody. So I was just wondering what the rules are surrounding importing and exporting supply managed products.
The rules are quite simple. You can't. For example, if you think you can bring U.S. dairy into the country without the appropriate quota, not going to happen. By the way, for example, I was at Anuga last year, and Canadians over there were trying to sell organic chicken. Well, because there's no reciprocity between the two countries and under free trade, you can sell the chicken all day long there, but you're going to pay a 30% duty. So supply management products are extremely difficult to sell abroad because they're reciprocal taxes, they're reciprocal restrictions, etc. Very difficult to do.
The only thing I'll add from a regulatory perspective there is, and obviously this comes there, the dairy market is obviously very protected. The meat market, let's say coming from the US, very protected. A lot of these things are very protected, but from a strictly regulatory standpoint, right now we just came into the Safe Food for Canadians, which is obviously one of the big new regulations that a lot of people are being faced with. So from an importer perspective, you have to have a Safe Food Canadian license for import, preventative control plan that talks about how you ensure that product is safe coming into the country, how you ensure that product meets consumer regulations, so you're not lying to anybody. You're saying that this is the standard of identity, this is the grade, if the product requires a grade, such as eggs, such as different kinds of products, honey, anything like that. And then finally, making sure your traceability and your recall systems are in place. So from a regulatory perspective, that's kind of what you have to have in place to be able to import any food product now. And then everything from that Terry mentioned is basically on top of that. You have to be aware of the commodity specific rules and things that basically keep people out of our market and support local, but also hurt you if you're trying to import, export, and other things like that.
Thanks, Dejan. I just wanted to remind the attendees that you can also raise your hand and ask your question out loud as well. So just to flag that for folks. There's a question in our Q&A here from Giselle Cardinal. Is there a minimum number of products a small organic food-based company should begin with? Have enough variety to hold interest / reverse overextending time? And asks what your thoughts are on that. Sure, Ben.
I started with 3. And I think it probably depends. That's where, I mean, the amount of time I've spent in grocery stores just loitering, I swear they think I'm a shoplifter at every grocery store in Guelph. But spend time in the category and see what's sort of normative for brands in the category. And I wasn't going to be a canned bean brand with one type of bean, right? That would not hold. But in other categories, now maybe Terry knows better on other categories, but certainly I squared myself against the competition and knew to hold the shelf space, I had to have at least minimum of 3.
I agree with Ben. What retailers are looking for to get started is an assortment. They're looking for a family. 3 is a good number. 5 is a good number. Unless you have a standalone product. When we launched the lactose-free organic milk, Loblaws approved it in 15 minutes. It's normally a 6-month process. 15 minutes it took them to approve the product, and it was standalone. If you don't have a good assortment, what happens is you become an orphan product on the shelf. Consumers pass you by. So you can have one product, but you must have about 3 or 4 facings to give you depth and presentation on the shelf. Remember the 20% rule. That think of it of, of how many consumers are actually going to see your product and then reach for it. So what's the reach? 3 products are good, nice little family. 5 are better if you can afford it, but sometimes you need 5 to sell 3. I will tell you though, that if you're going, most shelves are crowded. 1 product, very, very, very difficult to get any retail traction. You simply get lost in the assortment.
Terry's right though.
The other rule at retail is who stocks the shelf. High school students getting paid minimum wage. So what they're going to do is they're going to put a standalone sometimes on the upper right-hand corner of the shelf just because it's a pain and it's in the way. And if you don't police that shelf yourself, you'll get lost in the assortment and very quickly you'll be delisted. I've been in those meetings in those offices where the buyer looks at the turn rate or the spin rate, says, we're not spinning this enough, this brand is gone. It happens that quickly. It happens in seconds. 3 would
Terry's
be
right though, that your slower SKUs do help move your faster SKUs.
absolutely.
I have to have navy beans so that I can have chickpeas. Chickpeas outsell 6 to 1. And then you just blend it out.
Mm-hmm. There's a question in chat for Dejan, and the Timothy wonders, it mentions that Dejan was saying that it was a 3-year process for land certification, and he's asking, in a closed loop climate controlled environment, like a vertical/indoor building, what soil would you have to bring in, or if you use large volume high heat composting, would it be considered organic soil? In a post-maturity environment, the soil/plant matter will be composted within itself after the initial growing cycle. And do you have any thoughts about that?
That's a very complicated question.
Yeah,
no, so
obviously it comes from experience. Yeah.
Yeah, no, just to kind of cover, so the 3-year process for the land certification is, so it seems like that question seems to be coming up a lot. So that is really when you're transitioning from using stuff that like using additives, using these different chemicals or anything else that would be considered non-organic, that would not be allowed. When you transition from non-organic production to organic production, that's where that 3-year process kind of sticks out. So because I don't, to be honest, composition of soil, I don't know too much about that, and maybe that's another day. At the same time though, so he did mention a closed climate controlled environment. So obviously one that does not have direct access to soil, it would be soil that's brought in and stuff like that. There is a full set of regulations under the organic standards that talks about specifically that encompasses that whole aspect of it. What is allowed to be done in that kind of environment to be considered organic, what isn't allowed, and it does talk about soil. So while I don't have it's a very specific question, and I could answer that if I give you a little bit of time to answer that and look it up and everything. Off the top of my head, I couldn't answer that. Yeah, so maybe another day.
Yeah, fair enough.
Or something.
I do have another question here, which is regarding best practices or tips for making connections with retail buyers for products, and how to make those connections, or tips on how to be successful maybe once you've made those connections.
I think part of you're asking probably one of the most difficult questions of all time. How do I get an audience? To put a perspective for you, the average Sobe buyer receives over 500 emails a day. That's why they can't get back to everybody. So trade shows are a great way of doing it. But at a trade show, you have to, go big or go home. You have to have a very strong presence where the retailers are going to gather. The other part is through connections that may know in the trade. But if you want to edition your product and get in front of a retailer, there are two types. The independents, oftentimes you can walk in the door and ask to see the boss. Done that many times. Can I see the owner of the store or the store manager? Cold calling works. We do that with our line sometimes. We simply walk in the door and say, can I see the store manager? Or you find out who they are, phone and make an appointment. To see the major buyers is more difficult because you have to audition and find out why. But when you're getting started, do like Ben does. You should, there's a strategy in place that we actually have a presentation or presentations on how to do that, how to talk to retail, how to speak the language, how to walk in and scan the store. If you walk into a store and want to see the store manager, spend 10 minutes finding out which in that store and know where your product fits. That's probably one of the key components, where you walk in and say, listen, I'm selling XYZ product. I noticed that there's a hole in your assortment, a hole on your shelf. My product will fit that, and I'm here to make you nothing but money. They will give you the 5 minutes. And that's all you've got. So be well rehearsed and well planned.
Terry's right. It's you rehearse it, you practice it. I went through a startup program. They forced me to put together an elevator pitch. 30 seconds, what's my business do? I got it down to about 5 seconds. And the other thing that really helps is having consumers advocate for you. So I've been to Guelph Organic Conference, and I call them advocate consumers because they care about what I care about, and they shop at stores that care about what we care about. And they'll say to their favorite local independent natural food store, hey, why don't you carry Cullen's? And then they've done 80% of the heavy lifting for me. And those are the angels among us for small business people, because oftentimes they're already first name basis with their local grocer.
What happens when
you have to have a product that people love?
Are those all your family?
Pardon me, Terry?
What happens when you run out of family?
No. Yeah, well, thankfully I'm from a big family.
Right.
But, it's good to have 3 sisters, but no, it's if you have the opportunity to connect with people at something like a Guelph Organic Conference, or I've gone to garden shows and met people, and they really believe in what you're doing, and there are people who are passionate about this. That's the beautiful thing about organics, is that the people who buy organics are passionate about it, and if they're willing to do that, they're going to be way more effective than you're going to be.
The other thing to consider as well is who your audience really kind of is. So if you're talking to a Loblaws, a Costco, a Metro, a Sobeys, a Whole Foods, they're going to ask a lot more out of you to be on that shelf than local kind of a retailer. So, whenever I'm speaking to a client and they ask a question like that, I'm like, well, if you're talking to those about those kind of guys, you're going to have your GFSI certificates, all your C of A's ready to be shipped with each individual load. You'll have to go that next step. You'll be having to do more testing of your product to make sure it's safe, more lab costs, all sorts of different things. So if you're going to be approaching someone like that, make sure you've done the research to know what they're going to be asking, and that's easily available. It's very standard. They'll ask for that GFSI certificate, SQF, BRC, like we already discussed. They'll ask for organic certificates, obviously, depending on what your product is. C of A's for each shipment, so you'll have to be doing some additional testing. Get an accredited lab to do that testing for you. All sorts of different stuff that you have to have prepared before you even kind of want to walk through that door. Sometimes they'll work with you if you have a very unique product or a product that they really want to carry, like Ben and Terry were talking about, having someone who advocates that approaches them and they're already aware of who you are and what your product is. That'll get you through the door for sure at the same time. But having all that backup material, because they're still running a business, they still have to ensure that you are not going to become a liability to them through either terrible sales, but also through product recalls, through violations on regulatory basis, tons of different stuff. Yeah.
It's a completely different conversation from independents to majors. And the other thing which we haven't mentioned, and I don't want to get ahead of us, but you see Loblaws, Metro, Sobeys in the questions. They're going to want to know how much you can afford to pay for programs. And when you're doing your costing, we got listing fees we got to pay, and we have promos. If you ever want your product to go on sale, and a lot of brands are 70% sold on promo because that's what stops the consumer in their tracks. They see, oh, look what's on sale this week. Never tried this. Now I might try it, right? To get a new brand going, promo is so important. And that whole language and all of that math applies when you're talking to Loblaws Metro Sobeys. You can work out deals through your distributor if you're going to be dealing with independents and offering promos there, but you want to make sure that you have some money available is what they really want.
Yeah, you also better make sure that you have money for in-store testing. If it's a new product. So a lot of the chains or stores, they'll say, come on in on a Saturday. It sounds very good, doesn't it? But that could be $400 to $500 per store per weekend. So there's definitely the best way of getting your product done or maintain it at retail is put in people's mouths, if you can. But there's, as Ben has suggested, there's a cost portion. So in your budgeting, keep 10% back for promo costs, volume costs, marketing costs. There's about 15 programs that the majors run, and they'll just keep going down the list till they get a hit from you. Inside money is one of their most profitable sectors. And that's what it's called. It's called inside money, and this is how much money. And by the way, a lot of the buyers, their bonuses are based on getting inside money.
Yeah. And I think that's probably for somebody who is coming at this from outside, even if you've worked in other retail sectors, it's the unique thing, even about just Canadian grocery, the amount of that goes on. And you should read up in the news, Sobeys recently said, like, we need a code of conduct here because it is so aggressive and so rampant. The way that that inside money, those deals are negotiated. There's been a lot about it in the press recently. I'd recommend you read it to get an idea.
What I also mention is that when you are working with some of those bigger companies, there's also the stress of for example, a Whole Foods will send a auditor of their own to inspect you. Loblaws, Costco, they'll all do the same. Costco has a standalone audit of their own that they conduct for pretty much all of their suppliers as well, or they include it as part of their GFSI. So on top of the stress of the money, you should also be aware of the stress that they will be watching you. They will be keeping a close eye. They like to visit all of their suppliers. So they expect that someone will come on site and hold you to whatever standard that they have internally.
Now, I also see a question here about Costco. Again, not to get ahead of us, but it is a completely different beast all over again, where if you're listing with Costco, it has to be a unique item. So they'll want a unique pack size so that it can't be cross-shopped. So you're not going to sell a 1-unit SKU. You've got to repack into a 6-unit multi-pack, right? And the Costco consumer is really unique. They're very wealthy on average, and they're willing to try new products. So it's a great place to get your brand discovered. And it can be huge, huge, huge volume because Costco has what? Terry, correct me, maybe 4,000 to 7,000 SKUs, and a typical grocery store has over 44,000 SKUs. So if you're, say, the canned bean at Costco, you're going to be the only one. So you're not competing against other brands on shelf, which can be massively profitable, which can be huge volume, and they can drop you in an instant. So you want to approach that with plenty of capacity to know that you can service them, and with a buffer plan for if they ever let you go. But they tend to be pretty, in my experience at Smucker, they tend to be actually quite straightforward to do business with. Costco makes most of their money on membership fees. They take a small margin, and you can do a ton of volume there. And there's fewer kind of surprise fees, but the cost of making that multi-pack is incremental, right? And they want to be the most compelling retail in the market. So it can be disruptive. It can cause problems with your other customers. If Loblaws sees Costco out at a lower per unit price, Loblaws wants to make that even, and they can shake you down for it. So you have to be very kind of strategic about it, defensive. And that would be all I have to say for that.
You have to be very careful of your brand. Sometimes when you have a brand that you haven't built up a lot of brand distribution, you can take a hit by being in a Costco. Coca-Cola can take the hit because you have to have Coca-Cola, but then there's Pepsi. So be very careful on how you approach what you're doing with a Costco from a branding perspective. A lot of times retailers will ask, well, what's your distribution? Where are you? And if you say I'm in Costco, they say, thank you very much, but we'll look for somebody else. Costco is a formidable competitor. and retailers know that. Sometimes you go to Costco not as a last resort, but once you're established. We've been approached by Costco on several occasions, and we don't defer, but we know we have to build our brand presence and have strong brand strength before we can afford to go to a Costco. Or we do a fighting brand, an alternate brand.
Yeah. And then as far as the co-ops go, they just charge it a fee. I haven't seen listing fees from the co-ops, but they tend to just add like, I think it's what 12.5% is a co-op fee.
Exactly. The co-ops like free fills.
Yeah. They don't tend to be too aggressive. You're not going to get any surprises, but it's a high cost to do business with them.
So a lot of people will think, well, it's a free fill. It's not costing me anything. Do the math on a free fill. So that means that you're making no margin on this product. How much margin? So if you're making 20% margin on your product, that means you have to sell 5 times more volume in that free fill just to make up the lost margin. So there's an opportunity cost on a free fill that you must factor in. And so free fills are not free, not at all. And that, so if you go the rule of 5s, for every case I give away, I have to sell an additional 5 just to make up for that lost margin. So just to put it in perspective for you.
And if you ever offer a free fill, remind them the retail value of what they're getting.
Absolutely.
Don't tell them the cost value of what they're getting. Tell them the full retail value of what they're getting, because that's what it's worth.
All right. Thanks, guys. So we have another question that's a little bit from a different perspective from Fresh Guru Chris. He wants to know if you have any comments on what else a producer can do outside the retail broker environment to create demand for your line, if you have some distribution in place already. Is it just kind of get it listed and pray, or yeah.
Marketing. And different brands do it in different ways. Like the major CPG companies will assign a percentage of net sales to just automatically get spent into brand equity every year. And if it's a grow, maintain, or manage decline brand, that'll dictate what percentage of their net sales they invest back into brand equity. But you have to invest in marketing, and that's a separate conversation. You got to decide what your brand tone is, what your promise is, where the people are who you're trying to sell to. And a lot of people will encourage you to go on social media and get a following, whatever. You can do that, but it's a huge time suck to get out there, try and get followers on the social. I mean, from my perspective, I would say outsource it. There are firms that do it. I haven't done it yet, but I can afford to. We're outsourcing it. But, sponsor a podcast, show up at the organic conference. Please show up at the organic conference. If you're not there, are you even a part of this conversation? And meet your consumers at every opportunity that you have.
There's the old adage in marketing that goes, we know only 50% of marketing works. Unfortunately, we don't know which 50%. So what you have to do is be constant, and Ben's right. The brands that I've seen succeed are the owners of the brand or the brand ambassadors, and it's usually the owner. People want to talk to the principal when you're getting started. I mean, who owns it? Who are you? You're the face. And people want to see them. They want to talk to them. Word of mouth is extremely important. So we laugh about having families go into the store, but I will tell you, you go back to the marketing truisms, and that if there's a problem with your product, probably 10 or 12 people will talk about the negative. Only 3 or 4 will talk about the positive. So you want to make sure that, and know who your audience is. Is it male? Is it female? Is it what age? Who are they? What do they look like? And focus on them and trying to get your message to them so they become your inadvertent brand ambassadors. But if you're going to do marketing, do it well. Nothing can destroy a brand quicker than having my brother's uncle's cousin's best friend who took that one art class do my marketing for me. Get the best you can afford. And you will look back in a couple of years, like we heard earlier in the presentation. If you're not ashamed of your first marketing effort, then you've done it wrong. So I remember the first stuff we did, it was horrible. We look back and we laugh now. How could we have been so naive? But now you get better at it over time. But get the best you can afford. And there's lots of talent out there that doesn't charge a lot of money.
Yeah, and the important thing is when you are marketing, listen back to what's resonating. You know, I went out with a compostable package. I invested heavily in it. Nobody cared. They heard Canadian, they heard organic, minor key, they heard traceable. So those are my main messages now. And you have to pay such close attention to that because Terry's right. You don't know which of your marketing dollars are hitting, but there are clues and you find them. And that's where you put the thrust of your messaging.
Giselle is wondering in the chat about building on her question from earlier about, you know, how many products do you need for sort of best effect? And she's wondering about assortment across kind of different areas like human consumption versus, you know, animal consumption products, and whether they should be marketed sort of within the same umbrella or whether it should be, you know, completely separate marketing. And can you comment on that piece of it?
I'll just speak to the regulatory aspect of that. The animal product market is easier to access than the food. It'll cost less to access from because based on the regulations, it's a lot less regulation in the market for animal food. So from that perspective, it's easier. Maybe the other guys can talk about from the who the competitors are and marketing aspect of it, though.
I will give you one name, Mars. Everybody likes Mars candy bars. Do you know Mars is one of the biggest pet food manufacturers in the world? But there's no cross-branding. Because do you want to buy a food product from a company that's also making dog food? So be very, very careful what you do. You have to have separate brands, separate approaches, separate packaging. There can be no association whatsoever between a pet food product and a human consumed product. People are fussy about that. They like to feed, they may want to feed, you know, their pet dog human food, but they will not buy, well, unless you're a university student, buy pet food to give to their friends.
Or an entrepreneur.
Or an entrepreneur. That retorted pet food, by the way, is perfectly safe to eat.
It's all human grade. Smucker's owns some pet food brands too. It's all human grade.
Absolutely. My advice is keep your branding totally separate. Do not use the same brand at all. Keep them well separated, different packaging, different everything, because you're going to different parts of the store.
The way I think about this, and I got this from my dad, frankly, who was an independent retailer, is ask yourself honestly, where do you have authority? And you have to decide, because nobody likes a know-it-all who's dabbling in everything. So focus on what you are the best at. And if you develop enough authority at one thing, you might be able to shimmy a little bit to one side or the other, but you don't just land in a completely separate part of the store and have transmutable authority. It doesn't quite work like that from a perception standpoint. You can maybe do both. If you're big and complex enough, like Mars, Terry mentioned, you could do it in the background, but the perception of authority is a pretty delicate thing.
Everybody may not know, but Loblaws tried to sell motor oil. And they actually devoted about 20 feet in each store to sell motor oil products for cars. I think we got the consumer in there. Why don't we give it a try? If Canadian Tire can sell biscuits, why can't we sell motor oil? I think they sold 1 tin, and it was probably to the store manager. People did not, and it was under the Loblaws brand. People did not expect to find it, and it was taking down their brand. They had to get rid of it and get rid of it fast.
I think it's considered vintage now. I think I've seen people selling that all over the place because it's considered vintage.
Absolutely.
I think we're just chasing our timeline, and so maybe we'll end on this last question here. which is what areas, and if this is a trade secret, perhaps you'll have to say, but what areas in the marketplace right now do you see as wanting for organic products? Where are the opportunities in your mind for people to take advantage of in terms of developing or introducing new products that aren't already sort of have reached market saturation?
Well, does it Terry or Dejan, do you want to go first, or?
No, I'll pass that off to you, Ben. I'm interested and I'll be making notes.
Well, I guess I'm a surly consumer, but when I'm shopping, if I'm not satisfied with what I'm finding, trust your instinct.
Mm-hmm.
And I imagine everyone on this call is an educated consumer. Trust your instinct. Where are you? Entrepreneurship is just all about solving problems for people. And if you're having a problem, someone else probably is having that problem too. So just be very mindful when you're shopping. You'll come across it. There's a lot of sleepers out there. Just trust your instinct.
I would agree with you, Ben. I've seen everything from, as I said, from candy floss to chocolate bars to you name it, right down to rutabagas. But I'll give you a number. I'll give you a statistic. Ben's right, about 40 to 44,000 SKUs per store. Your average store will replace about 10% of their SKUs each year. That's 4,000 products. And people are on the hunt for local, they're on the hunt for organic, they're on the hunt for traceable, and they're on the hunt for trust products. So a typical large chain needs to find 4,000 products. Do the math, that's 10 a day. That's well over 10 a day they have to find. So if you've got a good idea or you see, it's called a shelf audit. Go into a shelf, look at the shelf, make note of the products on the shelf in an area you may or may not be interested in, and see where the gap is. There is a hole. And I've rarely done a shelf audit where there's not a hole. The trick is, can you get, and then look at the price point at what the products are selling on, add another 5% for organic. The days of the 30% premium, I wouldn't count on it, but if you can come in at around 5 and still make money, do a backwards audit and say, yeah, I can make product at this and make money. Any big store will give you an opportunity. Any big store.
And the other thing I would add is, I think I was talking to Rick Terry about this earlier this week. The tech community has not done a lot of favors to entrepreneurs in the food business. They're different spaces. You're not going to disrupt the whole industry, go public, become a billionaire in 5 years. It doesn't happen very often. Rounds of venture funding, it happens. And you'll read a lot about it in, say, like the plant-based protein lab meat area. There's a lot of those stories over there. But if you're a farm producer or if you're a small-scale entrepreneur, it's okay to be an incrementalist and say, look, what's the product that I'm buying anyway that could be incrementally improved with organics, with transparency, with a more local source? Incremental improvement is enough. When we're looking for 4,000 SKUs per year, is enough to flip the switch, I think. And you can't create a whole new category because you've come up with some weird concoction. The marketing effort to shift consumption that dramatically is going to be beyond the pale of most small scale entrepreneurs. But if you're looking at, you don't have to necessarily reinvent the wheel. Incrementalism is okay.
Great.
That's well said.
Yeah. Well, I want to take a moment to thank all of our presenters for being here and helped to contribute to this sort of rich conversation and for your time. And I'll send a message out to the attendees. We'll work with the Guelph Organic Conference, OCO, and presuming we can get a good quality recording out, we'll work with the conference to distribute that recording to the attendees that were in the room today. And other than that, if folks are interested in learning more about the Organic Council and what we do, as well as become a member, we're always looking for new members, and you can find more about us and and how we support the organic sector in Ontario at organiccouncil.ca. And so with that, I'd like to thank everybody for being here today. And it was a pleasure sharing this couple hours with all of you. So thank you.
Thanks, Stuart. Thanks, everyone.
Great job, Stuart. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Nice to meet you, Dejan.
You too. Take care.
We'll talk soon, man.
Yeah, talk soon, Terry.
We'll be in touch.